So it's fair to say that Formula One did not really present itself very well over the Belgian Grand Prix weekend. Of course, that hour-long delay before the race eventually got going, and even then it didn't really get going. Of course, it was behind the safety car. A lot of people in and outside of the sport have said they were far too cautious and it ruined the spectacle. And I have to admit, I can see why people would have that opinion. I've already given mine several times on the channel since then. But this is a temporary problem. The cars next year in 2026 reportedly will be better when it comes to this. They will not produce as much spray, because the problem was not the amount of water on the track. The cars could comfortably do those conditions on either the intermediate or at the very start, potentially on the wet tyres. That was not the problem. The problem is the spray. The problem is these ground effect cars, and we saw some of this at the Silverstone Grand Prix as well, the British Grand Prix, 3 weeks prior. Yeah, the cars themselves can drive around just fine, but the actual clouds of spray makes it invisible. It makes it impossible for the drivers to go around and drive at full pelt. But next year's cars in 2026, even though they are still ground effect cars, that'll be different. The problem will be better, effectively. It'll be less of an issue to drive in the wet weather. But how? Why? And is it actually true? Let's have a look, guys. F1chronicle.com as always. Formula One hopes that its new 2026 cars will finally be able to offer a solution to the growing spray problem that has crippled wet weather racing in recent years, including last weekend's heavily delayed Belgian Grand Prix. The next generation technical rules feature smaller diffusers and reduced ground effect, which the FIA officials believe will drastically cut the spray clouds that currently make visibility almost impossible in the wet. Narrower tyres are also expected to help as well. The main problem is that the underbody and the large diffuser, explained Red Bull's CEO Peter Bayer, reflecting on failed FIA tests with rain wheel covers. This causes the water to literally shoot out the back, the famous rooster tails that you'll see quite often in wet conditions, but it's definitely gotten worse in this current generation of cars. F1 ran multiple tests with wheel arches in 2023 and 24, but they had little impact. Whether with or without mudguards, it makes little difference, concluded Automotor und Sport after trials with Ferrari at Fiorano and Mercedes at Silverstone. Until 2026 arrives, though, the pressure on the FIA is only growing. Former F1 driver Christian Albers was furious about the Spa delay, telling The Telegraph in the Netherlands, "You're simply depriving those teams of everything," referring to teams like Red Bull that ran wet setups in anticipation of a Sunday storm. If you look at Leclerc, for example, he was able to reap the benefits. There's always going to be a bit of gambling when it comes to this sort of thing, when it comes to setup. I mean, Red Bull, of course, did a similar kind of thing, or they did the opposite thing, really, at Silverstone. They bet on no rain. They went with a low downforce setup that would have worked out if it didn't rain, but it did rain, so it didn't work out. But I do take his point that unfortunately, it is a bit of a poor spectacle to have these cars just sat around waiting for the track to dry. Albers went on to say, "Yeah, I just didn't think it was fair. The FIA needs to focus on these kinds of things because this is a blunder and inexcusable." Red Bull's new boss, Lauren Mekies, agreed. "We not only waited for the rain to stop, but then we also waited for the sun to come out, and after that, we still had many laps behind the safety car. But others backed the caution." Journalist Michael Schmidt noted, "We have to realise that if something does happen, race control will get all the flack." And that's true. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But was it still too cautious? I think it was a little bit too cautious, personally. Ferrari's Frederic Vasseur supported that view. "We can't blame them because we would have been the first to dismantle them if something happened." Yeah, but I still feel like they waited too long. It wasn't really that wet. And even then, there should have been a standing start, and it should have been started actually properly with racing conditions from lap 1 rather than lap 5 when they actually got underway. Those opening 4 laps were null and void, just parading around. I get the caution, but there was too much in my opinion. And I've already had my say a few times on the channel. Have yours in the comments below, guys. When it comes to 26 regulations, if there is less ground effect, there will be less spray. The spray with ground effect cars was one of the reasons why ground effects originally got banned in the early 80s. I believe after 1982, 83, they banned it. There was a horrific accident involving Alain Prost and Didier Pironi at Hockenheim that ended the racing career of Didier Pironi as a result, and that was basically down to the spray coming out of the back of Prost's Renault. It would be Renault 1982. So, yeah, it was. That's why. We're not going to see things like that happen again. In terms of a career-ending accident, that'd be extremely, extremely rare to happen nowadays. But you got to look at what happened with Isaac Hadjar at Silverstone. The guy couldn't see a thing. So I get the caution, but I think it was a bit too much personally. But it's a really fine balancing act, and I do not envy the stewards at all. But reducing the ground effect on the cars, that will make the spray less bad. Smaller tyres, that will mean that less water gets cleared, and therefore less water is in the air. Spa as well is quite a unique one, because you've also got all these trees that basically absorb the moisture that gets kicked up, particularly in the back section of the track heading through Blanchimont. The trees are massive, they are absolutely humongous, and any kind of moisture that is thrown up into the air, it'll get caught by the trees and eventually literally rain back down onto the track. So although you're temporarily clearing water from the surface, it will go back down and then get kicked up again, making the spray problem even worse. So Spa's a particularly bad one for it, but going off of this, in theory, it should be better next year. But will race control be a bit more bold when it comes to these decisions? Answers on a postcard. The proof will be in the FIA pudding next year. Like, share, comment, subscribe, guys. Have a great day around the world today. And like I said, get your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear what you have to say.